All right. Good morning and welcome. I'm Griffin O'Shaughnessy, the founder and CEO of Canopy Advisory Group. At Canopy, we help organizations build teams. We're an on-demand talent firm. We're ready to foster growth, accelerate performance, and tackle organizational challenges with our network of top-tier professionals. Part of our vision at Canopy includes connecting our broader community with incredible experts like Dan Martin, our guest this morning. We're so happy to have Dan host today's webinar. He is a fervent believer in the power of exceptional storytelling. Dan joined Canopy last year as one of our marketing experts, and I immediately asked him to assist with our storytelling as a company. He's completely blown me away with his ability to create written and video content that tells a story and is really impactful. Prior to being an independent expert, Dan had an in-house career spanning 2 decades, where he held marketing and communications leadership roles for large enterprises, small and mid-sized firms, public companies, and associations, all in industries across finance, tech, and human resources. Dan's career stops have included Jackson Financial, a retirement solutions provider, National Planning Corporation, and DHI Group, which is a tech careers provider. Now, as a fractional expert, Dan helps his clients build and evolve marketing and communications programs that are powered by unique content that educates, resonates, and delivers outcomes. We would love for this to be interactive today, so please feel free to ask questions live at any time, or you can throw them in the chat, and Serena and I will monitor the chat and bring those questions to Dan's attention. So with that, I will hand it over to Dan. We are so happy to have you here this morning. And we're running into our usual sort of like morning technical challenges. So Dan's screen isn't allowing him to share the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and share it and drive for Dan. So apologies if there's sort of any hiccups with that, but I think it should be fine once we get it up and rolling. So give me 1 second to pull that up, put it in slideshow mode, and then we will, let's see, hand it over to Dan. There we go. Can
Thank
everyone
you so
see that
much.
okay?
Yep, I can see it. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. I can hear you great.
Wonderful. Well, it's great to be here with you all today, and thank you so much for taking the time. And Griffin, thank you for that very kind intro. I feel like I should probably just log off now after that. But I'll be talking today about storytelling. Besides AI, storytelling is, as I'm sure you know, one of the top sort of buzzwords out there right now. You may have even rolled your eyes a little bit when you saw the title of the presentation. For that, I forgive you. So we have a lot of organization leaders, business owners, solopreneurs, practitioners on the call today. And so my goal is going to be to provide you with a framework of how to tell the right stories for your organization, something you can turn around and use today or tomorrow, next week, if you so choose. Storytelling, just as a concept, has been looked at as only a marketing thing for a long time, and something that only certain types of creative people can do. Can a truly great storyteller help you get to something that's top tier, that brings that magic that can be so difficult to find? Certainly, it's part of what I do for clients, but the story itself has to come from the founder, the business owner, the leader of the nonprofit organization. It's not about creating something out of nothing or thin air. It's about making what's true matter to the people who need to hear it. I think what I love most about storytelling, at least in the way that we'll talk about it today, is that it really is for everyone, and something that I think everyone could learn, benefit from learning how to do. If you're a CFO and you're presenting the quarterly revenue data and forecasts, you're telling a story with that information to the CEO, the staff, the prospects, the broader market. If you're the executive director or the chief of staff of a nonprofit, your story matters more than almost anything else. You need to get people emotionally engaged with the mission. If you're a CTO or an IT leader, talking about security and infrastructure, these technical concepts, you're still helping your audience understand them through storytelling. So after today, I want you to walk away with an understanding of the different types of core stories that you need to have in hand for your organization, the framework that I use for creating these types of stories, a better sense of how those are connected to business outcomes. So story isn't a separate creative thing. It's really connected into your business and organization outcomes. And remembering some of these examples that I'm going to share too, A lot of these are examples that I've kept with me over my career. And one of the best ways to internalize something that you're trying to learn is, you guessed it, through stories. So this guy covered in post-its here is kind of what we're all seeing every day. It's. I love marketers, of course. I am one, but for whatever reason, a lot of what's out there is really bad. And it's what you're being sold. I think what we're being sold is not storytelling. It's mediocre content creation at scale. Most organization leaders and business owners don't need more. What I saw in-house and what I'm hearing from every prospecting client that I talk to, the most pressing problems are lack of differentiation, lack of consistency, and having too many different stories swirling around. We'll talk about crafting and using stories in a way that's attainable and doable, in a way that solves real problems, and try to push away these distractions and the noise, and simplifying down to what you need and how you should be using them. I'd say the marketing hill that I will die on is that the organizations and businesses who win are those who can keep their marketing simple, and who value the repetition of the right messages in the channels that matter most over whatever the new shiny object is today or tomorrow or next week. So, what are stories if they're not just something the marketing team cooks up in that weird kitchen that you don't like to go into? What should they actually be doing for your organization? So we talked about how when we hear the term storytelling, we're often thinking of it as a creative pursuit, like writing a novel or doing a TED Talk. And that is storytelling. But we consciously or subconsciously separate it from the other things that we need to do in marketing or communications or sales. In a perfect world, these are all the slightly different versions of the same core story. Communications, marketing, sales, HR, all of these are ways to say the same things to different audiences and through different mechanisms. If everyone's telling the same stories, then that's what brand consistency is. Getting to that level of consistency and repetition, besides knowing your ideal customer, it's the most important ingredient to marketing and ultimately, I'd say, organizational success. People debate a lot how to generate consistency, and we end up adding more and more frameworks, and more tools. It really starts with keeping things simple, and it's simple is not easy. So this is far from easy, but I do think starting by setting yourself up to be more successful means not adding unnecessary complexity. So with stories, you don't need 100 average stories; you need a few very good ones. Um, this idea too that having core stories that you believe in and that you're truly building your foundation on also protects you from that shiny object syndrome. There's a lot of those flying by. It gives you flexibility to create a lot of different types of messages at the same time providing some parameters. You've got to have some parameters, so something you bounce off if you get too close to the edge. And so if you stray outside of them, you can go viral, you can generate some engagement, but it's not going to do anything for the organization. And that's a really important point about storytelling, is that it has to do something. It has to be functional, as well as beautiful. And brand, I think, it's about being memorable, and stories help you become memorable, but not for shock value. I'll show you some examples of that in a little bit. Being memorable for the things you want to be remembered for. What your product or service does, why it exists, why it's different than anything else out there, what really makes you special. That doesn't happen without repetition. And if you change the story too much or add too many parts on, one day you're going to look back and wonder, why aren't people connecting to the core of what we do anymore? And that might sound harsh, but I've seen it happen often enough that um, maintaining those core stories can help you avoid falling into that trap. I think stories, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, it sharpens things for everyone in your organization, telling these same stories over and over, whether it's just you or whether you have a big team. I think we tend to look a lot at external impact of these things, and that's important, but internal is just as important. Having that pitch that doesn't sound like a pitch, where people can hear your passion and your conviction, that's hugely important for closing business if you're doing that, or if you're fundraising or retaining clients. And stories are about creating experiences too. We know by now, you all know by now, the first product doesn't always win, nor does the best product. It's too easy to copy products and services these days. So in a commoditized world, who wins? The organizations and people who can create better experiences and that can offer customers the little things that show that we're thinking about them and that we understand them and that we're not just taking their money. Stories are one of the absolute best ways to do this. So yes, of course, they need to be good and interesting and different. I think that's what scares people. But I personally don't think you need to be a creative genius to craft the beginnings of a great story. And so we'll set the foundation for that today.
Dan, I love how you described brand consistency as being everyone telling the same stories. I think that's such a great way to describe that. And first you have to understand what those stories are, and then you have to get everyone on the same page telling those same stories. So I think that's
Yes.
a
Thank
great
you
way.
for that, Griffin. And we can skip to the one after this slide after this. And I think it's such an important because brand consistency gets put into the categories of um, operational and processes and how do we look at this from a process standpoint? You should do that. But the sneaky way to be successful with it is to simplify your world. So let's talk about the three different types of core stories that I think you'll refer back to most. So I call these bedrock stories, products and service stories, and teaching stories. So, and as you look at them all together on this slide, an important thing to keep in mind is that there are foundational assets for your organization that will incorporate all three types together. And so these are things like your strategic narrative, which we'll talk about, your pitch deck, if you have one, your company short story, which is my term for boilerplate because I really dislike that term. But there will always be some overlap. So some of those bedrock stories are going to talk about your product or service. Some of your products and service stories will be educational. So you'll see that overlap. But so understand that you'll see it, but it's also valuable to separate them out into these different categories because I think it helps you make sure you're covering all the key messages. You don't want to get into a cycle that happens in a lot of companies where you're getting into creating content, which is we need to be talking about this feature more, or we need a how-to piece on this tomorrow. That's a slippery slope. I think instead of getting to these right messages more consistently. And I believe this framework helps us do that. So we'll talk about each one in turn. So starting with bedrock stories, these are the for the most part, they can be taken from your strategic narrative, but they're the true core of how you talk about your organization. I would think of these as how you'd answer the "tell me about your organization" question, commentary, or some version of that in a side conversation or a text message when you're introducing yourself, maybe as a sponsor of the event or something. So nobody should be telling you what these stories are. These are the ones you know by heart. You can get help refining and articulating them, but I believe strongly that you shouldn't be letting the market tell you what these are. So there's so much in marketing and communications now about testing, and you can test a lot of things, but your brand is your brand. Who you are is who you are. And I think these live at the deepest level, and they focus more on the why than the what. Why do you exist? And the implication of that. Why should your customers and other people care? So a well-worn example, but a good one here is Patagonia. So Patagonia, as most of us know, makes quality, expensive, long-lasting outerwear, and their brand is strong enough to be known for that. But that's not the first thing that most people think of when they think of Patagonia. They were long supporters of the environment. They had a great recycle your old gear program to offset the carbon footprint. But in 2022, the founder gave away the company and donated. They're now donating all profits to support the environment. And Earth is now the only shareholder. That's a bedrock story. It's not about what they do at all. It's about why they do it and what they stand for outside of the goods and services they provide. Those goods and services fit into that story, and it's exclusionary too, to some extent, and we'll talk about that too. If you don't like that, what they're saying, don't buy Patagonia clothes, but they want the people who buy Patagonia clothes to believe that. So that's an example of a bedrock story. I want to talk a little bit about a strategic narrative because we'll share the framework in a moment. But strategic narrative is something that it's a term that gets thrown around a lot these days, and it's a really important asset and tool that you can have. But I had someone recently say colorfully, "What the H does that mean?" So I will tell you what what strategic narrative means. So Andy Raskin is one of the very best at articulating this. He defines it as it's the category defining story that guides the strategy. So, and that includes what you build, how you go to market, how you interact with customers and investors. And if that makes it sound important, it's because it is really important. It's one of the most critical things you can do from a story standpoint because it ties to the bigger change, ties what you do into a bigger change in the world. So your product or service isn't floating in what I call the sea of sameness. And I'm not sure if I made that up, and I haven't looked it up because I kind of hope that I did because I really like it. But strategic narrative, it also ties every communications and marketing and sales effort to the core purpose of your organization. So if you do this well, your strategic narrative can serve as you. That's hard to say. Can be your pitch deck or your call script, and it can really easily be customized. And this is part of what we'll talk about. But here are the elements of what a strategic narrative truly is. So number one, what is that shift in the market? And Griffin, with your permission, I'll use Canopy as an example
Oh,
here.
yeah.
So what is the shift in the market or world that creates urgency and has big stakes for those people you're trying to reach? So an example of that using Canopy. So the organization has this incredible community of expert advisors, many of whom are on here today. They know the fractional market better than anyone. They can help companies more quickly and at the speed of their problems than almost anybody else. The shift, though, is that the world's moving away from this all full-time, all the time model, as in organizations and talented professionals realize it's better in both cases in a lot of ways. So the future is fractional, and the future is blended teams, and that wave is starting to get bigger and bigger. And so the organizations who start implementing blended teams now will be thriving while others are scrambling. That helps people understand, Canopy as a product, a service, but it also helps people understand where the world is going. You have to paint the picture for people. So then what does that future look like? This desired state, beyond, if there's so much out there on like, this is happening or this is going to happen. Okay, that scares people sufficiently, but then what? If you want to sell the ideal state to people, you have to know what that feels and sounds like. So why is the new way better than the old way or the current way? What's different? You're putting people in this time machine and helping them experience it beyond, trust me, it'll 10x your business or your life. Okay, what does that look and feel and sound like to me? Third, you're bringing the urgency and those stakes home by showing what it really means to thrive in the new world and what it means to struggle. Andy Raskin talks about it as like showing that there's winners and losers here. And this is a side-by-side comparison, which we'll talk about how to do, of old world versus new world. People want to be in the new world, and they need to see what's going to happen to the old world. It can't just be that it's a little bit better. You're changing people's perspective on do it this way and be this way, and here's who you'll become versus the old way. And in most cases, in most organizations, I think we as fractional experts know this, you're not really competing against your competition in a lot of cases. You're competing against inaction. You're competing against the status quo. And so you have to get the status quo to feel really uncomfortable for people. And this narrative is the way to do that. So where do the products and services fit into this? So they're the tools that you need to succeed in this new world. I think of this section as really overcoming objections before they're raised. For Canopy, so leaders and owners who don't want to spend money might be thinking, well, I'll just go find fractional experts myself. That is extraordinarily difficult without a strong vetting process, which Canopy has. I have this bias against consultants, so I'll just bite the bullet and hire a full-time CFO. Canopy can show you that the impact increases often with a fractional expert, but also there's huge cost savings for organizations in addition to the benefits to the part-time, the fractional CFO. So like these features and elements of the products and services, they roll up into this big change, but they're these kind of the tools and gifts that you need to succeed there. And finally, and we all know this, and I think we tell clients this a lot, there has to be data to back it up. So this change we're telling the world about, I think there's a lot of great stories out there. And then when you dig in, you're like, yeah, but that's not really true, though. It sounds good, but it's got to be true. So it's telling true stories well. And so, from Canopy's perspective, we need to have data on this trend line, this change is happening, and more companies are hiring fractional experts, more people are becoming fractional experts. Here's the calculation of actually how much you save as a business by doing this. Here's the data on the drops in the tenure. So you have to have data backing. It doesn't mean only use data. Part of storytelling is using data as a tool, not as the only driver, but you have to have it. So there's a little bit on strategic narrative, and you'll see how that fits into the broader framework as well. So let's talk about products and services. These are the stories that you're telling in your customer's language and through the lens of the problems that they're trying to solve. So in my life as a corporate, marketer, the biggest mistake I saw companies make was conflating, product and service content with sales content. So product marketing means, product sheets and competitor comparisons and sales decks and enablement tools. Those items are useful, but without the right story, it's creating them as a waste of time. It doesn't, you have to have a story underpinning those things. Um, and so, sales content is important, but it has to use the same story. The other big mistake I think um, we make in talking about products and services is failing to use that language of customers. I think we so often we think we create because we created the product. This is what it does, and we talk about the products how we want to talk about them. And if people aren't responding, a lot of times we think like, well, we just need to do more of it and create more stuff, and get them to the and maybe in some cases that's true, but in a lot of ways it's because the product either doesn't quite do what we think it does, or the customers are looking at it a different way. The only perspective that matters is how they're looking at it. So it doesn't mean you shouldn't tell the truth, but it means you need to shift away, shift in the way you present those offerings. Like Kleenex is maybe the greatest example of this. Kimberly Clark original concept was, this disposable towel to wipe off makeup, and that's what they went to market with, and it was doing fine. But then people were like, wait, people are blowing their noses into these things. And so it's not using to wipe off makeup. And so, the company pivoted to like, you should use this to blow your nose. And it's a good example of like, sometimes you have to pivot to the way customers are looking at things. And Bic, I love the example of Bic too. It's one of my favorite ads. They don't lead with this grandiose story about like this great shift in the world and the market need for cheap pens, because they can't do that. But their story is about stability and consistency and staying the course, and it works because it's so uniquely Bic, right? Once they know their target market so well and their customer, it's not people making $1 million a year. That's Mont Blanc, right? It's the people who need to write a check for the contractor and they're rummaging through the junk drawer and they need something that works and all the other pens don't work, but the Bic works, and I think that's the power of like a really good product and service story, where they can lead with that and they will always lead with that. So then the last kind of story is what I call a teaching story. So this is a reframe of educational content. These are stories that you're helping prospects and customers solve their biggest problems with or without your help, whether or not they're your client or customer. So, you use these to show your expertise without the hard sell. They build credibility for your brand and solutions to put you at the head of a category in a lot of ways, or the role you play in a category. And it's just such an important reminder for your audience that your first passion is helping them be successful. So not easy. This is some of the hardest content to create to get people to engage with. So one of the biggest mistakes I see in these types of stories is conflating it with a ton of how-to content. You're probably being told that to do that in your business. It's like, just create a bunch of how-to stuff. People will find it on Google, and then, blah, 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 profit, right? And I think it's part of a useful content strategy, but you have to get closer to the actual purchase point. Here's a fake, hypothetical example. Imagine you're selling spa tubs in Colorado. So the temptation would be immediately start writing blog posts about top 5 reasons to own a hot tub. Could be a great piece of content, right? There's a zillion pieces of content like that. And so you're probably never going to beat somebody who's either had that for the longest time or they know how to game the system with Google. But imagine someone does find your piece. Are they going to read it through and be like, what a great piece. I want to buy a hot tub from these people? Probably not. So I'm not saying you don't want to have it. It's a good piece to have, but for that company, your core teaching stories are going to be more about things closer to the objections someone might have to a purchase. So the health benefits of a hot tub in a semi-arid desert climate, how the annualized cost of owning a hot tub in Colorado is less than people might think, how a hot tub adds to resale value of a house in Colorado. So you're educating people, but you have to tie it into, okay, what is going to trip someone up potentially on making the purchase, and so once you have those objections covered, you can do more. But I think we need to be strategic in how we create this type of content. A good example here, example I love is Tide Pods. So revolutionary way to disrupt laundry. notwithstanding the fact that teenagers are eating them, which is problematic. I don't know what to do about that, but this is back before that. So the story goes, though, that there's resistance from households when this came out because people are laundry is a sentimental thing to some people. You know, like my parents told me how to do this, and or, my mom or told me how to do this, and now I'm going to teach my kids how to do this, and I don't want to change the way that I do it. And so Tide got around that by running the numbers on how much liquid detergent was being wasted per load, because everyone pretty much overloads their laundry with liquid detergent, and so that alone really changed the tide. Didn't mean to do that, but of the product because people are looking at it and saying, okay, I have this sentimental connection to my laundry, but I don't want to be wasting this much. And so you're using something, you're teaching someone something new, something they didn't know, and it ties directly into the sales of your product. So that is that. Those are the three types of stories. And so the next big question is, okay, how do I create those? Um, and this is often the part that gets passed over, and it's frankly, I think, the most important. You need to share your stories in the right way on the right mediums, but it's got to be the right story, right? It has to be the right story, and you can have the best frameworks for distribution, but you should really start with the story. And you might be thinking to yourself, 10 steps is a lot of steps, and you'd be right. This could probably be 3 or 5 steps, but what I found is that making it more, that made it less of a checklist and a little bit less easy to use. So I think we've all heard enough of the like, step 1, write a great story, step 3, profit. And I think this helps you workshop your storytelling a little bit more. So I'll go through these fairly quickly. You'll get this deck after, but this is the framework that I use at the most basic level to get this project started and off and going. So the first step is what identifying the problem you're really solving. And this can feel like a Harvard Business Review question, like, does it scale? What are the OKRs? Have you synergized your synergies? And so that can feel like too far from your product or service, but it's not. Because without a good answer, it doesn't really matter how interesting or novel you feel like your product or service is. If people don't need it or want it, or they don't think they need it or want it, you're back at square one. So another way to answer this is to use Andy Raskin's prompt from the strategic narratives template. Name a big relevant change in the world. This is that shift. So one great example of the difference between this answer and a product is Square. So the payment company. So the product, when it first came out, is a piece of plastic with some good technology inside of it and tied to it. It is not interesting looking. It's just a piece of white plastic. But it exists because too many small business owners had to accept cash payments and couldn't access all these great opportunities available to them, only to larger companies, deeper pockets. So it opened up this new world for small businesses and created these opportunities where there really were none. And that's a huge change, and that creates urgency for business owners to get it to solve their problem. It has high stakes, but it has the potential to drive massive change for these small businesses. That is such a powerful story. So that's the problem they were solving. And to some extent now, you see Square everywhere, but that's where they started. So once you have that, it's time to identify who needs your product most and how you get the most out of it. Not who's going to pay the most for it, not who your current clients are, not edge cases. Who did you actually create this for? Why do they need it the most? What are the problems that they share that you are uniquely positioned to solve? It should be tied into the first answer. So using the same Square example, that product was created firmly for those small business owners. It's a very specific group of people. It can expand, but you have to start at the core. And so you might be thinking to yourself, I already know all these things. I'm a very successful business owner, organization leader. And so you can certainly skip ahead. But I also think it's worth revisiting these things more often than a lot of people do. Everyone wants to be the Apple and the Netflix and Canon who have a sustained, continued value over time. But don't forget who's on the other side of that: BlackBerry, Blockbuster, and Kodak. Who really thought they had their stories down. And knowing who you are and who you're serving is so important. But it's equally important to be adaptable and realize nothing lasts forever. So don't just set this and forget it. Go back when you can and really ask yourself honest, tough questions. So focusing on that ideal customer. there's so much out there now. People will just tell you, like, just talk to your customers and everything will be fine. You should do that. But there's more of I think, a science to that, which we'll talk more about here. And I think it's okay to have that concentric circle diagram of all the people in the entire galaxy who might ever use your product and service, or who might be donors or might be members. It's probably good to look at that and get to something that you believe. But you have to start at the center. So this is one of my favorite examples of all time. And Griffin, you can go down a few slides to the Hans Brinker Hotel right here. So it's it's one of the all-time greats. There's a self-styled worst hotel in the world. So it's in Amsterdam. It's essentially a hostel. They decided in their marketing, we're going to be who we are. We're super low cost option for students, people trying to save money. The experience is bad. So here's some of their advertising, which I love. So now a door in every room, right? Or like, I love the cigarettes on the carpet and they just cut the carpet out. Um, but so they're not going to get the people who are going to pay $2,000 US a night. They're not even going to get the people who pay 200 a night. But their stories are designed exclusively for the people they know who will be their customers. So being honest with yourself at this stage is really important. Everyone wants a massive total available market, right? But most products and services aren't designed that way, and for good reason. Who really is getting and will get the most out of your solution? If you have current clients, what can you learn from their experiences and their makeup? What do they really want from you, and what are they actually using or getting value from? And this is exclusionary too. Like I was saying before, you want to be inclusive in your marketing and include the people who need to be included, but you have to be comfortable with not everyone's going to buy a BIC. Not everyone's going to, stay at Hans Brinker. Like I don't want to, but I can see if I had $30 or something, or $25 and needed a place to stay and I was 22, I would, if I saw this, I would consider it, right? So it's all about how you position it. So I love that. I use that example as often as I possibly can. So this third step is back to what I was talking about in a strategic narrative on you have the first two, and you can put all this in a piece of paper, which I still like paper, or a Google Doc, or you don't have to use the super fancy software unless that's your thing, in which case do your thing. But so for this one, write out what happens for those people you've identified. You've identified the problem, who needs it most. What happens for those people when they have your product and service, and what happens when they don't? And the answers to these are so powerful. It sounds so simple, but it's human psychology. You have to make people want and need what you're offering, and you have to get over that cost of inaction, just like we talked about. So gather as much of these as you can. You can always pare it down later, but I think this is fun, and it's when I do it, it's instructive. The things that I come up with when I'm using this mindset. So after you do this, then gotta do the claims part. This part can feel hard and is hard because sometimes you don't have the data to back it up, and you don't have to have it all airtight. You're still trying to sell people something this future that we don't really know exactly what's going to happen, but you have to have something. So don't skip over this part. But it's important to do it at this moment. So at that point, you have a lot of the raw material that you need. It should be a lot of messy information here. So this is where you take your Google Sheet or Excel or Notion. If you're one of those overachievers who uses that, I've tried to use it. It's awesome, but I just go back to Google Sheets. So take the content and put them into these different categories. Highlight the items here that seem to belong in both categories. Maybe they do. And highlight others that you might be rethinking now that you're seeing them in different categories. The value of this framework is how many times you can go back and look at the same. You're not going to have 100 pages of stuff. You'll have a pretty concise sheet of information. And so how many times do you have the opportunity to look back and say, is that really right? Is that really true? And it helps you clean up the work that you're doing as well. So you've broken them out into categories. So now this is your chance, this refine and challenge. This is your chance to get these stories to where you want them before you send them out into the world. It doesn't mean you can't change it, but I just think there's something really special about this moment as a solopreneur, as a leader, as the person responsible for these stories. Getting these places to a story where you're proud of it, that's what you're doing here. And so go in one more time, be vulnerable, and then it's time to get out into the world. Your little birds are flying out of the nest here. So so now you're sharing it with, this is your most trusted staff member, your significant other. It's limited group of people who you really, really trust. So I'm an aspiring novelist, and I was reading about how J.R.R. Tolkien, the writer of Lord of the Rings series, had this group of fellow writers and aspiring writers that he called the Inklings, which is an amazing name that I wish I'd thought of. And that he would share his work, and C.S. Lewis is in this group. He would share his work with people before he published it and throughout the writing process, which not everybody does, but it's so powerful, because look what came out of it. But so I would say, like, in this stage, find your inklings and get them to look at this work and give you honest feedback. This is totally dependent on your style. Are you a rough draft sender? Do that until your trusted, your brain trust. Hey, this is a rough draft. I like to send rough drafts. Help me clean it up. You like things to feel polished? Do that. You like to have a glass of port with your friends in a mahogany study and give them the presentation? Sounds awesome. Do that. But do it your way. And so it's really more important how the people that you choose, that people will respond. They'll be honest with you, at least to a point, right? And usually the stage I found, it doesn't blow anything up. It doesn't change your message fundamentally. It just adds some really nice nuance and a few areas that you may not have been thinking about. We are all too close to it to some extent. So it should be your story, but someone you trust is going to come in and say, hey, have you thought about it this way? Because they're looking at it from an outside perspective. Every time I've done this, I thought, I have not thought about it from that perspective.
And Dan, before you share it with the world, of these 7 steps, where do you think is the best, or which steps are the best to incorporate Chat GPT or some kind of AI to help? Or are you a proponent of that as part of the storytelling process?
That's a great question. I think you could do that at probably stage 6, or if you're having trouble getting started at the beginning, you could do it then. I would say I would probably avoid doing it too much in this process because it has to be so deeply yours. So if you're going to do it for the story creation process, do it near the end of this, where maybe, so at step 10, you've gone on a bike ride, you've been away from it a while, you've come back to it. Then, okay, now I want to look at what, of all the things out in the world, which is what ChatGPT does, how would you look at this and refine it? And I think you also, this step 9, we'll talk about in a second, considering feedback is so important, right? ChatGPT is going to give you feedback. Your brain trust is going to give you feedback. You decide whether you take that or not. And that's so important. You may look at something and say, that's a really good idea, but it's not me. It's not us. It's not the service. I think you'll get some of those things from ChatGPT, as well as some things where you're like, oh, maybe I should look at that differently. So I would say build it up yourself first, using your, the way you think about it, and then use ChatGPT as a refinement and a mirror.
It's interesting what you said too about take it or leave it. I think sometimes depending on when you ask ChatGPT the same question, you get different answers. Sometimes it's a great answer, and other times you're like, "What? It's not as good. What happened to the last answer?" Right? So I can see it at that part of the process. But I know a lot of people that use it for a first draft. So you're saying just to get something down on paper, if they feel this sort of like writer's block, where it's like, I have this story, I have this idea, but I can't get started. Can it be helpful there for that first draft, or?
Yeah, it could be, and it depends on, it's all your style, right? Because if you're a person who wants and needs that sort of like the push on the bobsled to get going,
Mhm.
then
Mhm.
it could be valuable. I just think this is, most business owners and leaders are gonna innately have this in their head,
Mhm.
because they're so passionate about it. So like first draft outlines for other things, like teaching stories is a great example. Like you need a lot of data for that. Absolutely use an outline for that. But I think this is pretty personal, and so you focusing on like this is making sure it's what you believe is one of the most important parts.
Mhm. Perfect. Thanks.
That's a good question. Um, so we've so you go to customers, and every part of this process, like we said, you decide. And in this case, you'll be getting a lot of feedback of or like guidance of like, go to 100 customers. First of all, some people don't have 100 customers, but also you're not going to get a hold of 100 customers, and you'll probably annoy some of them if you do that. We're talking about like 1 to 3 of the people that you trust, to be honest with you. So they can be people who are detractors. If you have trolls, which that's how you usually know you arrived, if you have a good troll. If you have a promoter or there's someone who's like your business, you love your business, someone longest tenured, but the qualifying factor is that they're the person you created that product and service for. They are your ideal customer. So send it to them in advance, tell them what you're trying to do, and then if you can, take a half hour to talk with them. You can structure with specific questions, which if you have questions about what I use after the fact, I can tell you some of those, or go more off the cuff. But the outcome you're looking for is real, honest feedback, and how they see what you're doing and why differently than what you do. But the conversation can be really important because it's a lot about digging into reading between the lines of what they don't say and the mannerisms that they have and what they get passionate about. So try to have that conversation if you can. So one of the all-time greats at doing this is Lego. They do an awesome job, and Legos are something I'm intimately familiar with because I step on them 2 to 3 times a week. And so Lego goes even further than getting customer feedback. They actually do co-creation, meaning that they let customers send idea and then they actually send ideas and they build the best ones. So this next slide is a great example of the Research Institute Lego set. It was proposed by a geoscientist through their crowdsourcing platform, and she was a fan of Lego and wrote on her blog that a lot of Lego sets showed this skewed male-female minifigure ratio. And then so they built this. And then this is a rocket, the fan-built rocket. So you don't have to go this far to co-creation, but it's just a good example of like gathering user feedback through like a website survey is going to give you something of like someone's like, hey, I don't like this button. But for this process, you really want to get those people who are going to be honest with you and who are passionate about helping you succeed. So we talked about consider and adjust a little bit, so I won't take too much time here, but this is really vulnerability time of like, what do I believe? What do I want to accept? What do I want to not accept? I can tell you as a aspiring author, I thought I was better at taking feedback until I hired an editor. And then I was like, why would you take a pen to my beautiful work? It's perfect. So it's harder to do than you think, but it's important to have those conversations with yourself. And then finally, it's like I was saying, I think take a little time away before you're done. If it's you, if you're a port person, have another glass of port maybe, pry that Lego out of your foot, go for a run. Don't think about it for a little while. There's a lot of science around, letting our brains solve problems subconsciously. So that's why you have your best ideas in the shower. We're on autopilot there, and so your brains are focusing on other things. And it's why when you sit back down to crossword puzzle after a few days, you suddenly know a bunch of answers because your brain is solving those problems. So take a little while away from it and come back, and you'll have some final refinements to do. So that's the process. So is anybody still awake? I guess I can see some people are. Looks like great.
Still here.
Any questions before we get just to talk really briefly about implementation?
We've just got some good comments in the chat saying good ideas. Thanks, Andy Canigliaro, for sharing kind of how he uses Chat GPT and stories. And saying oftentimes it's helpful for transcribing like the voice to text feature, and then for going from text to a draft presentation,
Yes,
storyboard version, that can be helpful too.
it is a powerful tool, and the way I think about AI a lot is like it's really good at some things, and it's not as good at other things. And so you look at your use cases and decide like, is it going to be really good for this? If that's the case, you should be using it. And if for something else, you might be say like, it's really performed poorly for me here, and maybe I'm not as good at prompting, or maybe I should just not use it for that. I look at it more as like an important tool in your toolkit.
Mm-hmm.
So putting stories in practice, like so once you have this, what do you do with them? And you're way ahead of almost everybody else if you've gotten to this point because you have these stories that you can use to really expand out in everything that you do. So the first tip is to have a post-it if you still use post-its, which I do, and stick it to your computer to remind yourself to use these at every opportunity. So moving from theory to practice requires practice. So the more that you use them, the more comfortable they'll feel. And so here's an example I've always loved. Probably not a core story for Marketo, which is an email marketing database provider. And Griffin will do a build, I think, on the next one. But it's an example of taking every opportunity to use a story to provide an experience. And so I was in Marketo trying to find something, and I went to a 404 error page, and instead of the usual 404 page, it's like, hey, it makes you feel kind of like insulted, or it's like, you screwed up. What are you doing here? And then you can't get back to the site. They wrote a whole version of their own version of the Edgar Allan Poe Raven poem, Quoth the Raven 404. I'll never forget that because so I'm having this experience where something is wrong, and they have taking the time to put this together for even their 404 pages is an example of like nothing should be a throwaway, and every interaction is an opportunity for stories. So try to get into that mindset. Second, we talked about this too. Connecting your marketing strategy to your organizational strategy is so important in bringing this stories to life. It's helps a ton with implementation. They because they show who you are, what you do, and why you do it. And as an implication, you don't have to jump on every trend or to be funny or shocking or weird or aggressive unless it fits your brand, right? So two examples in the build here. One is you might have seen Duolingo's social presence, which is it's like they're an app to help people learn how to learn languages, but it's semi inappropriate or in some cases fully inappropriate. It's like shocking and trend jacking, and then I will say they do a great job and they're really fast at that, and it works for them. But I've been in so many situations where someone's like, just be Duolingo, be use shock value. Maybe, but only if it fits with who you actually are. And so Griffin, if you do the build, here's be yourself is what's important. And so if you look at this other example, this is from Camp Aldersgate, the nonprofit. Their page says what the organization does, and it is an engaging tagline. Provides a big call to action on what they want you to do. Register for summer camp. So sometimes the best way to sell a horse is a sign that says horse for sale. And so remember that you don't have to do it the way Duolingo does it. You can just talk about what you do and show your passion, and that can work too. So it's really about it's about who you are. So to make sure we have enough time, I'll go through these next few quickly. So separating strategy from execution is another example of that you can have these great stories and you can even have this a good implementation plan, but if you decide to outsource the content creation and you maybe don't brief the creators enough, or it really looks like, okay, we're going to create this big volume of content, it's got to be connected into the work you already did. Otherwise, you end up with meaningless content, which can actually hurt your brand. Avoiding overcomplication. This is worth saying one more time. Have I said it? Is it that 100 times do I win something? Don't overcomplicate it. The simpler that you can keep the number of messages and where you're using them, the easier it is to keep a handle on it. As you grow, this changes, so keep auditing it. And finally, measure differently. You have a slide on that I won't go into detail, but you can see, look at after the fact. Basically, using core stories as a mindset shift, but operationalizing it can do wonders in helping you integrate it into your day to day. Like, don't think in terms of the number. PR as an example. Don't think in the terms of number of press releases we've sent this year, and we've sent one product release per quarter. Okay, that is tracking, but track in terms of the coverage that you're actually getting based on the topics of your core stories. How much coverage are we getting on our products and service stories? Are our teaching stories resonating? Are our bedrock stories out there? That is a much better indicator of whether people are talking about you in the way that you want them to talk about you. And there's some other examples here of kind of just shifting how you track things. So takeaways, and I won't read these to you because you're all very wonderful business and organization leaders, and so you can read them yourself. But repetition, 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 like we've said, taking the time to really do this right and not forgetting to check back in. Don't confuse simple with easy. And remember that it's just a starting point, but you are what make these stories what they are by using them, by refining them, by bringing them to life. So it's this is a way to get going and to get momentum. But then what you do to refine these and use these is what makes them powerful and so uniquely you. And I love seeing that. I love seeing when people can really spend the time to do this, and you look at someone's social post, you look at someone's website, and you say, yes, that is different. That seems unique. That's not in the sea of sameness. That is different. So I'll just close by saying, because I want to spend some time for questions, that I don't know if I ever really truly understood the power of story until I started my own business. I had a sense of working, I had a sense of it when I was working in large organizations, but I was always kind of in more in my own world than I should have been. I think it's easy for that to happen in-house. But so like just like I opened in the intro, like every interaction is a story opportunity. In every informal conversation, whether it's a prospect or a friend or everything in between, you're sharing your story in some way, shape, or form. I love this Lego graphic. Do I love Legos? Maybe. But this quote from Anne Handley, she's the author of Everybody Writes. Good content is not about good storytelling. It's about telling a true story well. And so beyond the frameworks that I shared today, that mindset has helped me remember how these messages and ideas are at the core of everything that I do. And that when I do a good job of making people believe them as much as I believe them, I'm doing a better job of selling myself and my services, whether I think about it that way or not. So I've also included a slide of some of my favorite resources after this, which you can click on those links. There are so many out there. If you want to dig deeper, this is really, we're scratching the surface here, but Anne is awesome. She has a great framework here. Story Brand is such a wonderful, read this book if you have a chance. Donald Miller, it's awesome. And then Pipdex, which Griffin showed me, is such a cool idea for this like storytelling card deck.
Yeah, I love these takeaways are so helpful. And I think how you're talking and saying that every interaction is an opportunity for a story is like such a critical takeaway for me too. And it reminds me of my daughter who's learning to drive, is 15. So I've had to call her drive safe driving school more than I've wanted to make appointments and schedule different, lessons and things. And they put you on hold forever because they probably have one person covering all of these drive safe schools. But while you're waiting on hold, it plays this music and then they get on to the phone and they say, thank you for your patience. Patience is a crucial part of being a safe driver. So they like even incorporate that. And it sort of gave me a moment of like, oh, okay, you're right. Like I can be patient here because I need to be patient as a safe driver. And all of a sudden, just waiting on that call with pretty bad customer service tied me back into their core story and their core mission, which is safe driving. And so it goes to sort of the page error story too, of like, what a cool opportunity just to place just a little story. It took 10 or 15 seconds for them to tell that story. And it really connected me with their mission.
I love
So
that, Griffin.
there's,
And I think it's such a great, like the reminder of how people experience things. And really for us, the people telling the stories, if you ever get to the point where you're like, oh, I feel like I have to post on LinkedIn or I have to create this piece of content, what do you think the person on the other side is feeling when you do that? As opposed to like being passionate. Like if I had come up with that Quoth the Raven 404, which I wish I would have been so happy about it and I would have told everyone about it. And I think it's it's so much about experience. So I love that.
I love it. All right. Anybody else? Let's see. We've got a couple questions in the chat. Jamie wants to know who in an organization should be creating the story. Is it best done by an internal or external marketing professional? She's assuming it's probably someone in senior leadership that knows the story best. Do they need to be actively involved?
That is a great question. In my experience, regardless of the size of the organization, it needs to start from the top down. So if you're a solopreneur, obviously it's only you, so you're doing it. But it's got to come from the founder, the owner, and it can be sourced from a smaller group there. But otherwise, it's too easy to get away from what the core offering was originally meant to do. So I think that's important. I do think, obviously uh, it's part of my services, right? But I do think bringing a marketing professional to help you refine it and articulate it can be really valuable. But, it is your story. If there's one takeaway that's so important here, it's that like you don't let people help you refine it, but don't let people tell you what your story is, because you
Mhm.
know that. So I think it's really important to start that way.
Any other questions anyone wants to ask live? If you guys would like to connect with Dan or an organization that could utilize his help telling stories, we're happy to connect you with him. Just reach out to anyone at Canopy, any of your team members here, and we'd be happy to get you in touch with Dan. But I know there's a lot of good sort of feedback in the chat, Dan. I think everybody really enjoyed the presentation. It's so relevant and so a part of everyone's lives, no matter what we do, no matter what fields we're in, there's an opportunity to tell those stories. Lori's asking if everyone can get a copy of the slides, and we will circulate the slide deck to everybody that was in attendance this morning. Yeah. So,
Actually, you have to buy my course to do that, Griffin. So
yeah, sorry. There's a $99 fee for that.
yeah,
No,
so let me know without a sales pitch.
we'll circulate that to everybody, of course. Happy to hear Kirsten said it's getting her storytelling juices going. So I think everybody is grateful for your time, Dan. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us all. And thank you all for joining and learning with us.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much for taking the time and bearing with me. I love talking about this.
Yeah, it's such a relevant topic, so interesting, and so fun. We've got another comment here saying storytelling is key to nonprofit work. As an executive director, I don't ask for donations, but I instead share the stories of need and impact. So true. I think it goes with sales too, right? And whether you're, looking for fundraising a nonprofit or doing sales with a business, very similar impact from storytelling. So thank you all. Happy Thursday.
Thank
Enjoy.
you.
Thanks for being a part of our community and learning with us today.
Thanks for
sharing.
organizing. That was great. Thanks.
Great to see you all.
Yeah.
Bye.